The hardest math problems that you encounter are probably just the word problems, right? Math problems in the math SAT are typically very straightforward. Like you either know them or you don't know them, right? And that's the thing, right? If you either know how to solve them or you don't, but for word problems, that's not the case. You can know the method to solve it, right? You can understand, like, let's say it's a quadratic question. You can generally understand it, but the application and the way they tell it to you is just so different and convoluted that it's just hard to understand what it is. So this is how to tackle every single word problem to make them easier to solve and know what to apply. So hi, I'm Karthik. This is the trick to solve all word problems in SAT math. All right, let's get right into it. The real constraint, right? If you're struggling with word problems, right, you just like all word problems are an issue for you, or it's just a particular word problems are an issue for you, which is like generally the case. It's not that every word problem is hard, it's that one or two particular word problems are hard. And the reason why that is that the real constraint of you not being able to solve word problems, right? Knowing that, like, let's say it's a word problem about quadratics, right? And you know how quadratics work, like, you know the formulas, you know just the basic idea of how they work. The idea is that the real constraint is not the fact that it's a word problem, it's your level of practice, right? And I'm still going to cover strategies on how to deconstruct word problems in this like video. I'm not just going to completely abandon the idea, but you should realize that your real constraint is not the fact that it's a word problem, right? You might be distracting yourself with that or not fully understanding that it's not the word problem that's the issue, it's your level of practice, right? If you practice with extremely hard examples and versions of regular problems, right, of that same skill category, so let's say it's like a quadratic problem and you have like experience with the hardest quadratic problems, right? The hardest problems that they can throw at you, then the word problems will actually be easier. So it's your level of practice being the real constraint, not the actual problem. So here's what you do to instantly tackle that. And you need to use this on top of the strategy, right? Use Khan Academy, right? What they do with Khan Academy, right, is every time, like, let's say you're brand new to it and you just start off the skill, basically what's going to happen is you're going to take it and it's going to like analyze where you are in that skill, and you take it again and the problems get harder, right? They get a little bit harder until you reach like the max difficulty point, which is like you achieve mastery, and then you take it once more, and that's basically it, right? You can't after that like go beyond or get after. But the idea is that you use that to practice getting increasingly difficult problems for the same subject type, right? And as you see more examples that are going to become harder and harder to solve and know how to solve, you're just going to learn more applications of the same skill that you learned, right? So if it's like finding the solutions to roots, you're going to realize like, oh, I can predict the path of like a ball that I throw up in the air and it comes back down in the same arc. I can predict where it is and where it's going to be just by knowing like some certain values, right? You're going to learn more applications of like, let's say the thing is quadratics again, just from knowing the idea of how to solve it and how to do certain problems by getting those different examples and more difficult examples from Khan Academy. So highly recommend you do that. That's going to be the main driver of improving, right? But specifically, right? The reason why that works is just more experience with harder questions increases your levels of experience, right? Level of experience with that kind of problem. It's just going to improve your, I guess, skill in that problem, right? It doesn't make you any better at learning the concept, but it just makes you better at practice, right? That's why in all my other videos, especially for grammar and math, you see me talk about a learning stage of learning the concept and then a practice stage of actually applying the problem to increasingly difficult problems. All right. How to deconstruct problems. Okay, this is where we get into the actual strategy, right? The first thing you should do, right, is you need to identify the key information, right? Sort out the key information and extra details. When you're first starting and learning how to do this, like literally what you're going to do is go through the problem, and it's okay to like cross out pieces of information. So let's say like physically with a like pen or paper or whatever, like what you're going to do is you're just going to like see that piece of information and you're just going to like cross it out, right? With that idea is like you don't need to do that, right? That's the like when you're first starting out is when you do it, right? When you highlight the pieces of information that you feel are relevant and just cross out the pieces of information that are not relevant, right? But after a while, you just tend not to need to do this, but you want to get into the habit of naturally sorting out the information. So only keeping your eyes on the parts that actually give you any information about the problem and not keeping your eyes on the parts that just add some extraneous detail, because you want to just isolate how much you're looking at as much as possible, right? But the next thing to do is translate that information that you know and you get into math and relationships, right? So what I mean by that is that you're going to see like a piece of information, right? So let's say it's like, I have 5 ducks, right? So that means like the value of me, right? I have 5 ducks, right? So just know that like that is a physical value, like a number, right? But if it's like you have twice as many ducks as me, right? So you have like twice as many, right? You have double the amount. That is not a mathematical like thing that you can write like a number, right? It's not, but you can write a relationship, right? You have 2x, I am x, right? And keep in mind, I use the same variable there, right? And I'm going to explain why. So let's say we could represent the amount of ducks that you have as y and the amount of ducks that I have as x, right? But that would be kind of useless because there's a relationship between them. So we can have variables and numbers attached to variables that mean very different things, right? So I can use x to represent like just the amount of ducks that I have, and then 2x would represent the number of ducks you have. We use the same variable, but because there's 2x and x and just that number, because the relationship kind of defines what the variable is, we can use like the same variable to represent two different values of different people, right? So that's relationships between the physical values, right? So every piece of key information that you get needs to be sorted into relationships or values, right? That's the only information that the SAT will give you in a word problem is relationship or values. Obviously, it's slightly different for problems like that involve geometry, but it's generally the same that you get a diagram that gives you all the values and informations, and the relationships are things you just need to know, right? So if it's that SOHCAHTOA, if that's Pythagorean theorem, right? Whatever those relationships are, whether it's 30, 60, 90, or 45, 45, 90 triangles, what those relationships are just things that you know generally, right? So what you're doing here, right, is you need to show either a relationship between the physical values themselves or just the values are just present, right? And this is something you can do explicitly, again, like the writing example, but you don't necessarily have to. After a while, you just get used to doing it and you can just do it in your head almost instantly, right? Okay, sorting, right? So the information pieces, right? I'm actually not talking about the information pieces you just took. I'm talking about new information pieces. So what I mean by that is known and unknown information pieces, right? So basically, you need to find the labels, right? So using our duck example, a label for mine would be like the amount of ducks that Karthik has, me, Karthik's ducks versus your ducks, right? So those are labels for it. And do we know how many ducks that you have? No, right? We don't know the explicit one, so it's you, but we do know you have twice as many ducks as me. And we know that I have 5 ducks. So in fact that you know I have 5 ducks is like known information. The fact that we know the relationship between the amount of ducks that we have is known information. And the fact that we don't know how many ducks that you have, that's unknown information, right? So that's our known and unknown categories, right? So it's just sorting that allows you to easily figure out what's the next step. Now, obviously this, like if the problem just asks how many ducks do you have, it's pretty easy to find out, right? But the idea is that it's not always going to be that easy. And sorting these, right, you can do that explicitly again to start, but obviously learn to do it in your head and learn the concept, is that we're just sorting out these categories, right? And we always want to focus on how do we move as many like concepts, right? Information pieces from the unknown category to the known category, right? Because if we can do that better, that's how we're able to solve the problem faster, right? So we also, like I referenced this in the last thing, so I'm not really going to talk about it that much, but we need to use the least amount of variables possible. So to do that same thing where you use the same variable to represent multiple concepts just by adding numbers and relationships to them, right? And that will represent unknown variables. But here's the thing about diagrams, right? If you have diagrams, essentially the known and unknown information is given to you. Everything that's known is just on there. Everything that's not known is not on there, right? So if they give you a diagram, just be sure to use that and be sure it uses the information that is given, right? Isolate the method, right? Now that you are at that sorting phase where you've sorted everything you need to know, right? For our duck example, I know that literally the thing that I have to set up is like, I know X is 5 and the relationship is 2, so it's 2 times 5, right? The amount of ducks that you have is 10. The idea from that is that I have figured out exactly what method to use just because I've isolated it so heavily, right? And notice at the very beginning of this video, I said if you knew very complicated examples and you had a lot of practice with that problem, you would be able to instantly identify what the thing is. Now, obviously, I gave a very easy example, but notice how I probably didn't even need to sort the information for you to realize that that like I have 5 ducks and you have 10 ducks if you have twice as many as me, right? So that is technically a word problem because I didn't explicitly write any variables for you, but I just essentially translated that fact. So isolate the method as a result of sorting. And as you just get better and better with more harder problems, you don't even need to do this sorting method explicitly. You just do it in your head and you're able to isolate the method very quickly, right? Here's some tips, right? Just the main idea for math in general is that you need to know what part is the constraint, right? Is it the actual skill? Like, do you know how to solve the problem? Or is it the practice, right? Do you not know how to practice for that type of problem, right? Also, volume, right? If you're in the practice stage, you need to focus explicitly on doing as many as possible, right? And increasing the difficulty. So Khan Academy is perfect for that. Just practice them as much as possible. And memorization and retention, right? That's what you focus on if you're learning, right? If you're learning the skill, all you need to know is just memorize the method. You don't need to worry about volume because eventually you want to move on to practice. So just learn and memorize the method. If you guys are interested in SAT prep, click the link down in the description. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today.